Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to another lecture of this course Philosophy of Architecture. Today is lecture number 9 and the title of today's lecture is Aesthetic Principles of Architecture Part 4. In today's lecture we would cover difference between sculpture and architecture as given by Immanuel Kant. We will cover Wittgenstein's architecture. Wittgenstein, as you know, is one of the greatest philosophers of 20th century, and correspondence between Tractatus and his architecture. Tractatus is the masterpiece of Wittgenstein. We will also see closely the architecture of Wittgenstein house and Raum plan of Adolf Loos. Raum plan is something like room plan or space plan made by Adolf Loos. So, this broadly would be the content of this lecture. Before we move forward, I would like you to pay attention to this picture on this slide, and you can see that in this picture you have one cube over cube, and there are several cubes in this picture, each cube of varying length and height and breadth and so on. Interestingly, both the architects that we are going to deal today, Wittgenstein and Adolf Loos, both of them thought of architecture as combination of these cubes. We will look at it in greater detail, but I would like you to keep this picture in mind as we go through this lecture. So, think of a house which is just assembly of these cubes. So, you do not really have ground floor, first floor, second floor, third floor, you just have cubes, and these cubes are interconnected. Some cube is for one purpose, some cube is for another purpose, and so on. So, keep this in mind while we discuss the architecture of Wittgenstein and Adolf Loos. But before that, we must look at what Immanuel Kant said between sculpture and the difference between sculpture and architecture. Now, Immanuel Kant, some of you would know that he lived from 1724 to 1804, and he is one of the greatest philosophers of all times. He was a system builder, and when we say system builder, it means that one part of philosophy will fit into another part of philosophy, and this way he created an elaborate structure of philosophy which even till today is being discussed, debated, written about, and so on. So, but today we will focus on what he said as difference between sculpture and architecture. If you recollect, the difference between sculpture and architecture was given by both Schopenhauer and Schelling, and in the previous lecture we have seen in great detail what difference they make out between sculpture and architecture. For example, Hegel was very clear as to it is the sculpture which is superior to architecture, and it is sculpture in which gods reside, and because gods reside in that sculpture, because gods reside in that statue, the temple that surrounds it finds meaning. So, the source of meaning is in the sculpture and not so much in the architecture. This is what Hegel had to say, and let us see today what Immanuel Kant says. Now, I have tried to place sculpture and architecture side by side and what he has to say on both the art forms. So, the first one, he says that corporeal concepts of things as they could exist in nature. So, Kant is saying that sculpture is about things that the way things exist in nature. So, and corporeal concepts means body. So, concrete concepts which can be expressed in concrete form in the way they exist in nature. Whereas, about architecture in similar fashion, he says art of presenting in an aesthetically purposive way whose form has a determining ground in a voluntary end and not in nature. So, first difference is that architecture need not be in nature, okay, need not be directly connected to nature, and then he says that there is a voluntary end. So, if you remember Vitruvian triad, he says beauty, utility and durability. So, utility is an end, utility is a purpose, utility is an objective, and architectural objects or buildings have a purpose, have an end, have an object, alright, and art of presenting in an aesthetically purposive way. So, there is a purpose and you present it in an aesthetic manner whose form has a determining ground in a voluntary end. So, the form of the building, the form of the structure is determined by the utility, by the end, and not in nature. Means say you create a building and building need not look like a tree, or building need not look like a dog, or building need not look like a waterfall, alright. So, the determination of the form of the building is not nature, but it is purpose or utility. So, this is one major difference that Kant gives between sculpture and architecture. The second difference that he says is sculpture is a mere expression of aesthetic ideas. So, mere expression of aesthetic ideas is the chief aim. So, in sculpture you just have to express the beauty or beautiful ideas that you have. Okay, the main aim, the chief aim is just the expression of aesthetic ideas, whereas in architecture use of artistic objects which restricts aesthetic ideas. So, what Kant is saying is use or utility or practicality limits the use of aesthetic ideas. So, while you may think of something very beautiful and fantastic, but if it is of no use, then it will not come in architecture, whereas in sculpture if it is beautiful, it is sufficient, you can just express it through sculpture. Then he says in sculpture we have statues of gods, alright. So, I mean he is talking in 18th century, so perhaps that time gods were important. Today we do have secular sculpture also, but for him sculpture meant statues of gods, whereas for architecture it is the temples that house gods. So, architecture is about temples that house gods, whereas sculpture is about statues of gods. And final difference, sculpture is for viewing and is to please for itself or imitation of nature. So, sculpture is for viewing, to enjoy looking at the sculpture, looking at its beauty, to please, and it is also for imitation of nature. So, when you look at something and you find beautiful, you imitate it in the form of a sculpture, whereas in architecture we see appropriateness of the product to a certain use. So, when we see the product, when we see the material, how can it be made appropriate for a certain use? So, that is what architecture is all about. So, this is how Immanuel Kant distinguished between sculpture and architecture. You can see the difference. Hegel relates it to God, relates it to freedom of spirit, relates it to spirit itself, spiritual freedom and so on, whereas Kant is fairly secular about it. He is just seeing the difference lies in, because architecture is for utility, sculpture is not for utility. So, there lies the source of difference between sculpture and architecture when it comes to Kant. Now, we will go to Ludwig Wittgenstein. Ludwig Wittgenstein, he is a great philosopher and he lived between 1889 and 1951. He lived in Vienna and he is famous for several ideas, particularly picture theory of language, language games and so on. But I must also tell you that he quite enjoyed being an architect, and in fact he was involved in creation of one building which his sister had commissioned. So frankly his sister wanted a house to be built, and you know, Wittgenstein belonged to one of the aristocratic family of Vienna in Austria, and they were very rich, and it was his sister who wanted a building to be made, and she hired an architect called Engelmann, and it was Engelmann who was supposed to be the architect of that building. But she said that he was free at that time, and she said that why don't you also become a part of this project. So he also joined Engelmann, and both of them together made that building. But often Engelmann said that it was Wittgenstein who was the real architect of that building. But Wittgenstein is also a great philosopher. In fact, he is a much greater philosopher than an architect. But particularly I wanted to discuss works of Wittgenstein in the field of architecture, because this gives an insight into the fertile area between philosophy and architecture, because this is a high ranked philosopher and who is also an architect. So how does a philosopher architect, we have seen some architect philosophers like Le Corbusier, we have seen Robert Venturi, they are architects, they are primarily architects, but they are also philosophers. But in this case he is primarily a philosopher and he is also an architect for one building. So I particularly wanted everyone and all of us to look at his work in the field of architecture. So he says that working in philosophy, like work in architecture in many respects, is really more working on oneself. Now you see how a philosopher is relating the two disciplines of philosophy and that of architecture. He is saying that both working in philosophy and architecture is similar, and it is more like working on oneself. And when we say working on oneself means what? It means working on one's own interpretation and on one's own way of seeing things. Now what do you mean by working on one's own interpretation or one's own way of seeing things? When you are working on it, it means you are not satisfied with the way you are interpreting things around you, ideas around you, structures around you. You are not satisfied with the way you are looking at things, the way you are seeing things, alright, and therefore you want to work upon it further so that you are able to see deeper and interpret in a more real and ideal way. So he is saying that working in architecture and working in philosophy is like working on oneself. In this slide you can see the picture of the house that he designed or he was the architect of. It is called Wittgenstein house, and I would like you to remember the first slide that I showed you, which was a collection of cubes in a small area, and this building, this Wittgenstein house, reminds us of something similar. So this is called Wittgenstein house because it was created for his sister and it was designed by him and another architect, Engelmann. Now many things or many ideas, many ways have been, many words, many ideas, adjectives have been used to describe this house, and some such descriptions are here. House is unadorned. It is somewhat asymmetrical and of white cubic geometries. So you can see these are cubes and this is white in color and it is little asymmetric. I mean, you do not see that right side is equal to left side or back is equal to front. it is not really like that. It is slightly different and slightly odd, that it is just, I mean, you can clearly see that there are obviously at least 3 cubes in this building. Then Wittgenstein's work is down to its smallest detail. In fact, it is said that he not only designed the whole building, but he also designed the doorknobs, he also designed the radiators, he also designed the heating system and so on. Mind you, Wittgenstein was an engineer from Manchester. So, he brings to the table an engineer's way of thinking, something which is similar and yet much different from what Le Corbusier did. Le Corbusier brought engineers' aesthetics to architecture, whereas Wittgenstein has brought engineers' way of thinking to architecture and thinking about the details as well as thinking about the structure. So, this building is free from all decoration and it is marked by severe exactitude in measure and proportion. So, everything is very exact, precise, and it is also severe. When we say severe, it means that it is austere, it is simple, it is exacting, it is not ornate, it is not ornamental, it is not flowery, it is severe, it is solemn, alright, it is free from all decoration. So, this is the nature of the house that was designed by Wittgenstein, the great philosopher. Let us see some more. So, its beauty, I mean, here I show you a picture of the inside of the building and you can see that how simple it is. Its beauty is of the same simple and static kind that belongs to sentences of the Tractatus, sentences of great poetic force. So, you can see how simple, you have seen one picture, you are seeing another picture, you can see how the ceiling is, how the walls are and how the windows and the doors are. Even the windows and doors are very simple and you see the frame, the frames are of metal. So, metal, what is the quality of metal? Metal is hard and metal is cold. So, any spiritual idea or spiritual person is also likely to be cold and hard, and they are also poetic in a simple sense. So, it is fairly simple and it says that the beauty is similar to the beauty of the sentences of Tractatus. Now, what is this Tractatus? Tractatus is actually the book, the masterpiece of Ludwig Wittgenstein. He wrote this book and the complete title of this book is Tractatus Logico Philosophicus. Alright, that is a long name and generally this book is called Tractatus. So, everywhere you will see that it is being referred as Tractatus. This is the book, I am showing you the cover of that book. I will also show you the opening lines or the first chapter of this book, and this is worth taking a closer look and reading the opening lines of this book. So, this is a very short book, I mean it is barely 80-90 pages, it is very thin, it is short and the whole book is in the form of these numbers. It is, the book is in the form of statements and all statements are numbered, alright. So, you can see that how he has structured the whole book and he says that after this book he has solved all the problems of philosophy. So, he said that after this there is nothing remaining in philosophy to be done. So, he stopped doing philosophy and he went back to architecture and he was doing many other things for about 20 years because he thought that he has solved all the problems that exist in philosophy. And later he realized that he has not really done that. So, he came back and he wrote another book. But today we will focus on this book which is his masterpiece, Tractatus Logico Philosophicus. And opening lines of Tractatus, it is numbered. The first statement, the opening line of this book is, the world is all that is the case. This is how he opens the book. This is statement number 1. and then second statement he numbers it as 1.1, and he says the world is the totality of facts, not of things. So, he distinguishes between things and facts. The world is a totality of facts and not of things. And then he says 1.11. So, which means the 1.11 is about 1.1, and 1.11 he says the world is determined by the facts and by there being all the facts. So, this is how he is building on the previous sentence, the world is determined by the facts and by there being all the facts. Then he goes to next 1.12, where he says for the totality of facts determines what is the case and also whatever is not the case. And then 1.13, the facts in logical space are the world. And then next 1.2, the world divides into facts, and then the next 1.21, each item can be the case or not the case, while everything else remains the same. So, this is how the whole book goes, and it is very difficult to understand what is the meaning of case, then what is the meaning of facts, and how they come, how they relate to each other, what is logical space, and he goes on to describe and explain what do they mean, and it continues for about 80-90 pages, and it brings to philosophy an engineer's, not aesthetic, but engineer's state of mind or engineer's worldview to philosophy, which is abstract and discursive and so on. And because it is so comprehensive that all the philosophers at that time and later are befuddled and bewildered of this book, and thesis and thesis after thesis are written on this book, and it continues to remain one of the masterpieces of 20th century philosophy. But today we are not so much concerned about his philosophy, but more about his architecture, and we see if there is any correspondence between his philosophy and his architecture. We have already seen some similarity, that the kind of structure he has given to his philosophy and the kind of structure he has given to his architecture is something similar. Let us look again. Now, here I have given some more pictures of this house that he has designed. Metal fittings have an unadorned industrial quality and are expressive of mechanical ingenuity and mathematical know-how. Now, take a closer look. Look at the metal fittings, look at the window, look at the way the staircase is moving, then look at the way light is streaming in, and of course, there is a dining table and so on, but it is all so simple and there is no industrial quality. You do not feel that it is mechanically produced or produced in an industry or a company. It is as if it has been created by a silversmith or an ironsmith, and it is they are very expressive and expressive of ingenuity, expressive of say mechanical artistry and also mathematical know-how. So, they are all very symmetrical. You see, if you look at it carefully and you think of a mathematical equation, perhaps there will be some kind of similarity between what you see in this building and what a mathematical equation represents. So, metal fittings here have an unadorned industrial quality and are expressive of mechanical ingenuity and mathematical know-how. Let us move forward. Some more pictures of this house. Aesthetics is articulated in the careful proportion of the rooms. So, the aesthetic, see, our conventional understanding of aesthetic is challenged here, because it is not decoration, it is very simple, and here the aesthetic is of proportion of the rooms. So, you look at the height, look at the corridor and see how rooms are coming out of the corridor and so on. So, aesthetics is articulated in the careful proportion of the rooms, the grand rather intimidating heights of the ceilings and an overall concern for a sense of harmony and symmetry in the arrangement of the interior spaces. So, see, one is intimidating height of ceilings. If you remember, Henry Lord Keynes was saying that one of the emotions that architecture generates is that of grandeur, and he said that height of the ceiling immediately helps you to generate the emotion of grandeur. So, here what he has done is he has raised the height of the ceiling, and because of that you can feel rather intimidated. Intimidated means you feel grand, that you are in front of something great and you feel small. So, that is the emotion that this building is able to generate, and you feel that there is an overall sense of harmony and symmetry in the way the interior spaces are organized. Let us move forward. So, this is the Wittgenstein house. In fact, there was a book also written on the architecture of Ludwig Wittgenstein. You can see there is a design of the house on the cover of this book, and he says Wittgenstein's house, people say, and this is a statement on the house, it is cool, austere and serene, split between inside and outside, unsayable mystical truths. Now, when you enter this house, you feel that it is cool, austere and serene. So, you feel that it is place where you will not feel very passionate, your passions cool down, it is austere. I mean, if you remember in one of the lectures, I was saying that you feel like where passions cool and you are cold and hard spirituality, something like what Vedic rishis stood for. So, it is cool, austere and serene, and it is split between inside and outside. So, at various places you will see that you are at the intersection of inside and outside. You are at places where inside and outside merge, and then it have a feeling as if you are not able to express the experience, the truth, experience of the building or the truth that perhaps you are realizing, which are mystical in nature. So, it is almost unsayable beauty, indescribable beauty of this house is nearly mystical, and it takes us towards various truths. And then Wittgenstein, in fact, he responds. So, we have seen Renaissance architecture, and we have also seen that in Renaissance human being was placed at the center. So, everything revolves around human being. That is what we saw and we studied about Renaissance, but Wittgenstein says that no, architecture is not really about human body, it is like a human gesture. So, by making this kind of a building, what he is doing is he is gesturing to the world that this is, and that gesture is cool, austere, serene. It is almost indicating towards a mystical truth. So, Wittgenstein likens architecture to human gesture, whereas Renaissance equates it to the human body. Then some more statements about this building and another picture about this building. You can see that how you can approach this building. So, this is a house of great spiritual beauty, austere, noble, without any ornament. So, you can see there is no ornament really in this building. It is very simple, of great spiritual beauty and austerity, and it is characterized by an overwhelming impression of austerity, simplicity and stillness. You perhaps get a sense of stillness in this building, that it is still, it is not acting, it is not moving, it is not moving, it itself is not moving, and it is not letting you move, it is still. So, that is the impression, that is the emotion that it raises in people who contemplates it, who lives in it, who goes around it and so on, who studies it. Some more statements, these spaces are non-illusionistic. See, these are all philosophical statements. which are applied to architecture. So, these spaces in this building are non-illusionistic. So, they are real. It is not that they are creating an illusion. These are real spaces. Okay. They do not create illusion, they are real and monumental in scale. So, you see all the cubes or the building is monumental. See the window or the door, they are very heavy and they are also very big. So, they are monumental, they are not small, they are not just of the right size, they are in fact much larger than what they need to be. So, they are monumental in scale, then they are symmetrical, well proportioned and quite static. So, this is another element that we must understand, that they are quite static. So, I am told, and while studying I found out that the windows and the doors are very heavy in the, because of the use of metal, they are extremely heavy, and to open the window you need to use a pulley, and it is said that Wittgenstein himself designed a pulley by which the window can be opened and closed. So, it is by nature it is quite static, it is not easy to move, and that is also perhaps a quality which is austere and spiritual. As I have said that this building was created for his sister, actually his eldest sister Hermione. She was also fondly called Gretel. So, she wrote, after receiving this house or at the completion of this house, she writes, the house, Hermione writes about her sister who had commissioned this house. So, her sister was Gretel, and Hermione is writing how her sister who commissioned this house liked or did not like. So, she says, Hermione is writing, she is sister of Gretel, she is also sister of Wittgenstein. So, she is writing, the house fitted my sister Gretel like a glove as soon as she had furnished it in her own idiosyncratic way and filled it with her personality. So, the way she furnished the house was in keeping with her own personality and what she liked and did not like and so on, and it fitted her like a glove. The house was simply an extension of her personality. So, Gretel's had a personality, and Wittgenstein thought that this is her personality and therefore, this is the kind of house she would like, and he created a house which fitted her personality, or which was almost an extension of his sister's personality. So, that is what his other sister is writing, that house was simply an extension of her personality, a subtle emanation from her, just as from childhood onwards everything surrounded her had to be original and on a grand scale. So, it was like Hermione, her sister, is writing that it was a subtle emanation from her, something that has emerged from her personality, and she is writing about her childhood of Gretel, that Gretel always liked to surround herself with things that are original, not that are fake, not that are imitations, but things that are original and on a grand scale. So, Gretel liked things that are original and that are on a grand scale. That is what Wittgenstein was able to capture in this building while he was making this building for his sister. So, this is definitely an original design and it is on a grand scale. Let us move forward. Wittgenstein in 1929. So, remember, this house was completed in 1928 and he is writing in 1929, immediately after the completion of this house. He says that my ideal is a certain coolness, a temple providing a setting for the passions without meddling with them. So, here he is saying that this house can provide a setting where the passions can unfold themselves, where the passions can cool down, and here the building would not meddle with passion, it will not create new passions. The passions that you have, they will find a platform where they may unfold themselves. Alright. So, he is creating a stage he is providing something like a proscenium to the individual for whom the house is designed, and where those passions can unfold themselves, those passions can flower, and those passions will not be meddled with. So, he says that his ideal is a certain coolness which he was able to give to this house. Today, this house is actually a Bulgarian cultural institute. At one point of time, it was there for demolition, and it remained in that status where there was a threat of demolition on this house for 2 years, but later on Bulgarian embassy thought of buying this house. So, they bought this house and they have converted this institute into a cultural institute. So, today if you visit Bulgaria, you can see this house as a cultural institute and you can visit it. So, this reading, the reading that we saw earlier, that my ideal is a certain coolness, a temple providing a setting for the passions without meddling with them. So, this reading fits well with Wittgenstein's own assessment of his architectural achievement. What he says, the house I built for Gettel is the product of a decidedly sensitive ear and good manners, an expression of great understanding of culture, etc. So, what he is saying is that his sister has a very sensitive ear. So, she is able to listen to the difference between what is good and not good, what is ugly and what is beautiful, and so on, and good manners. Because as I have said that they belong to the aristocratic family of Vienna. So, they are not only rich, but they are well mannered, and his sister had great understanding of culture and of music and all that is called culture. And he said that I have built this house for Gettel, who has these manners, who is culturally evolved and has great understanding, and so on. So, he is able to create an architectural object which fits very well with the customer, who in this case is his sister. So, let us move forward. So, today the difference between a good and a poor architect. So, and here he gives his own verdict on what is a good architect and what is a not so good architect, and he says that today the difference between a good and a poor architect consists in the fact that the poor architect succumbs to every temptation, while the good one resists it. If you remember, whether it is Vitruvius, where he is writing 10 books on architecture, and the first book itself is on qualifications of an architect. If you remember Indian view on architecture, which is the text Mansara, and the first chapter or among the first chapters is defined the qualifications of an architect. If you remember Chinese view on architecture, which is Ingzofashi, there also they are talking about qualifications of an architect. So, even Wittgenstein, which is as late as 20th century, mid 20th century, he is giving qualification of an architect, and he is saying that a poor architect will succumb to temptations, whereas a good architect will resist it. What kind of temptation? It is for you and me to figure out. If you are an architect, you will understand it better, what kind of temptations architects feel. And here I would refer you or direct you to the discussion that we had on the conversation between Jean Baudrillard and Jean Nouvel, where the objective was to create singular objects of architecture, which means unique objects, that which has not been copied from somewhere, that which is not an imitation, that which is unique, that which is singular, that which has not existed before, and how difficult it has become to create something singular, something unique, because of Disneyfication, because of culture. So, that is what Wittgenstein is perhaps talking about, that a good architect will resist such tendencies of imitation, of mimicry, of copying, and he or she will be able to create something new, something unique, something singular. which he manages to do in this case, and he is able to serve the needs of his sister quite well. Now, let us move forward and come to the architect whose works inspired Ludwig Wittgenstein. It is not very easy to say, because he does not give any direct reference to his work being inspired by Adolf Loos, but we must establish this because Engelmann, Paul Engelmann, who was the appointed architect of this building, was a student of Adolf Loos, and both of them together worked on this building. So, we can assume that Wittgenstein was inspired by the ideas of Adolf Loos. Adolf Loos lived between 1870 and 1933, and he is of course he is an architect and he is known for several buildings that he had created, but he is also known for an interesting book, and the title of that book is Ornament and Crime, and he wrote this book in 1908, and he said that ornament in modern times has become a sign of cultural decadence. He said that more and more ornamentation, I mean, if you make building very ornamental, very decorated, then it is a sign of cultural decadence, means that culturally you are not really advanced, you are still living in the past, you do not have anything of your own, you do not have any of your own way of living life, your thinking, your feeling and so on. It only is sign of a cultural decadence, and since you do not have anything, so you are going for ornamentation. So, he is saying that progress of culture, if you become more advanced in culture, you will gradually eliminate all ornamentation. So, progress of culture is associated with elimination of ornamentation, and that is why he associated ornament or ornamentation with crime. Alright. So, he said ornamentation is actually crime, and then he said that this ornamentation has to be eliminated from buildings, furniture, clothing design, household utensils, etc. So, each one of these had become very ornamental, very decorated, very elaborate, very ornate, but he said that as we become more and more cultured, we must remove this remove this ornamentation and make things simple and simpler. In fact, he said that ornaments and embellishments on building is something like tattooing a building. So, he equated these ornamentation to tattooing, and he in fact sarcastically said this statement, because tattooing is something very cheap and very gaudy, and that is what he said, that if you make buildings ornamental and if you make drawings and decorations on the building, it is nothing more than tattooing them. So, this is what Adolf Loos was, and Adolf Loos, in fact, he also started something called Secession of Vienna Circle. So, in Vienna there is a group of artists or architects who are I mean, if you know Vienna as a city, it is very beautiful, it has old architecture and they are very decorated ornamental architecture, very ornate and elaborate and very beautiful. But he said, and you can see from this statement, that as culture is progressing, the decoration must stop or decoration must get eliminated. So, Adolf Loos is saying that this Vienna circle, which created these architectural objects which are decorated, we must move away from that Vienna circle. So, he is associated with this movement which is called secession of Vienna circle, moving away from Vienna circle. So, that is what Adolf Loos is, and he stood for non-ornamentation of buildings. So, what Adolf Loos said is also seen in his buildings, and I have given here two examples of the buildings created by Adolf Loos. One is Cafe Museum in Vienna and another is Steiner House. You can see how the thoughts or the ideas that he has of less ornamentation and cubes are getting translated into his architectural works. Now, you see what he is writing. My architecture is not conceived in plans, but in spaces, and when we say spaces, it is cubes. So, he is thinking of spaces as cubes. We have seen in the first slide, it is the whole building is nothing but an assembly of cubes. So, my architecture is not conceived in plans, but in spaces or cubes. I do not design floor plans, I do not design facades and sections, I design spaces. So, he is making those spaces, and those spaces are actually cubes. So, he is not designing floor plans, facades and sections, he is designing spaces. For me, there is no ground floor or first floor or second floor, etc. For me, there are only contiguous, continual spaces, rooms, anterooms, terraces and so on. So, he is making these spaces as contiguous and as cubes. So, even terraces, anterooms, rooms, they are all actually cubes, and they are not located in different floors like ground floor, first floor, second floor. They are serving their own purpose in their own way, and stories merge and spaces relate to each other. So, each one of them tell a story, and how they merge into each other, how these spaces relate to each other is different from, because when you go to floor wise construction, one floor is isolated from the second other floors, but here that is not the case. Here they all talk to each other. Every space requires a different height. Now, it is something very interesting that one room is of this height, another room is of some other height and so on. So, dining room is surely higher than the pantry. So, pantry need not be so high, but dining room must be higher. Thus, the ceilings are set at different levels. So, ceiling of different rooms in the house are at different levels, and that is something very interesting about the designs of Adolf Loos. And then to join these spaces in such a way that the rise and fall are not only unobservable, but also practical. So, when you go to these different rooms, you should not really notice that the ceilings are different, but you must notice that they are very practical, that pantry does not really require a very high ceiling, whereas in the dining hall, if the ceiling is high, there is a greater sense of celebration and grandeur and movement towards making human relationships possible, looking at each other with wonder and so on. So, what he is saying is, in this I see what is for others the great secret. So, others look at it as a secret, that oh, why the ceilings have different height and why should they be like this, why can't they be simple. But for me, that is for Adolf Loos, it is a great matter of course. He said that it is something which is most natural, that is how it should be, that children's room should have lower height, whereas adults room should have higher height, dining hall should have a higher height and so on. So, that is how he goes about doing his work, and you can see in Cafe Museum and Steiner House. Those of you who are interested and inspired by this idea, I would urge you to go to Google and find in detail about these two buildings and other buildings of Adolf Loos. You will find enough material for inspiration and joy. We come to the last part of this lecture, where we discuss the ROM plan of Adolf Loos. ROM plan is nothing but space plan, and space plan is what? How he is designing spaces in the site where he is supposed to design the house. Now, ROM plan can be room plan, can be space plan, but what he is saying is that he designs an intricate system of terraced spaces. So, you can see in the drawing that terraces are at several levels, and these are intricate systems. They are connected by staircase, and they are connected at different levels through cubes, and there is a labyrinthine connection between these spaces, which makes them dynamic and drawing the eye and countering a contemplative attitude. So, they are all connected and it is little different from what we are generally used to. So, it's labyrinthine. So, you feel that as if you are lost, you do not know where you are going, something is hidden, something is apparent and so on. So, and that way it becomes quite dynamic, that the connection between spaces are dynamic, they are living and perhaps they are hiding something. If you remember the discussion between the philosopher and the architect Jean Nouvel and Jean Baudrillard, they are saying that a building can become a seduction if there is something secretive about it, there is something hidden inside it, there is something which is both a combination of place and non-place, apparent and secret. So, perhaps through this, by designing cubes or houses in the form of a assembly of cubes, what he is doing is he is hiding something which we are not able to discover or understand in the first go. So, the building becomes dynamic and it draws your eye, it captures your attention and you become a little tentative, you become a little unsure, you become a little uncertain, and that is how you start questioning how you should be in this house, and that unsettling, that uncertainty makes you live little more mysterious life. The effect, what kind of effect such a building has on people? So, the effect is one of rich textures, a feeling of warmth and sumptuousness and a playful dialogue between large formal and cozy intimate spaces. So, some places like he is saying that dining hall has high ceiling, alright. So, it is a large formal space, whereas smaller places like children's room or playroom, they are cozy intimate spaces, and how these two types of places dialogue with one another. So, what he is able to do is he is able to weave rich textures in the structure of the house, in the structure of the same house, so that he can create a feeling of warmth and sumptuousness and a dialogue which is playful, a dialogue which is continuing, a dialogue which is dynamic and unending. So, this is what Adolphe Loos is all about. Adolphe Loos's design and how it is different from other designs and so on. So, today what have we done? We have come to the end of this lecture, and what we have done today, you can see that we started with new way of looking at architecture, particularly by a philosopher architect who is Ludwig Wittgenstein. Of course, we started with the difference between sculpture and architecture by Immanuel Kant, and then we came to Wittgenstein and looked at his work as an architect, and we looked at the building that he created for his sister, which was called Wittgenstein House. He created it in 1928. It is known for great simplicity, solemnity, and that which is cool, austere and serene. So, this is what he managed to create, and the greatest thing about this house is that he was able to not only match the requirement of his sister and her ideas about culture and life, etc., and his own way of thinking about philosophy. He was able to marry the two and create a structure which is a living embodiment of his philosophy. From this we went to works of Adolphe Loos, who said ornament is crime, and therefore he started to design houses that are less ornamental or non-ornamental and which have a peculiar structure of designing spaces in terms of cubes. So, he called it Raumplan, and in some strange way Ludwig Wittgenstein was perhaps inspired by Adolphe Loos when it comes to architecture. So, this is what I had to say in this lecture today. I hope you enjoyed the diversity of thinking about architecture in the context of Ludwig Wittgenstein. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.